Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to BRASS 101, where avalanche safety begins. To kick things off this evening, it is my pleasure to introduce one of the founders of BRASS. Please join me in welcoming Cindy Burlack.
Thank you so much, Tom, for all your effort and your skill in putting this program together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn. I'm Ronnie's sister. We're very pleased to be able to share snow safety with you this evening.
In 2005, Ronnie and his good friend Bryce Astle were U.S. ski team athletes, 2015, on a race trip in Austria. They were taken from us in an avalanche, skiing on lift service terrain in the middle of a ski resort. They just did not have the knowledge they needed to stay safe. We Burlacks and the Astle family do not want any other family to go through what we have. So please listen carefully and talk to your buddies about what you learn here. We're very pleased to have Lindsay Mann here tonight, who's a highly qualified avalanche instructor, ARI certified, and she is a level 200 alpine coach at Sun Valley. She also serves as director of mountain experience there and is a mountain guide. We at BRASS, which means Bryce, Ronnie, Athlete Snow Safety, are pleased to present our program tonight, which is geared to skiers and riders in the mountain time zone. However, the information applies to anywhere that you ski and ride. Some of the content is spectacular and some of it is tough to watch. We hope it grabs your attention. Here's Lindsay.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Tom. And thanks for the BRASS Foundation and the Astles also for inviting me to present tonight. We're going to start out just why are we here? Why is this important? And hopefully everyone got a chance to watch the full-length off-piste video. If not, we recommend after this presentation going and watching the full-length video. But we're here tonight and we really appreciate everyone joining and coming on because as ski racers, coaches, parents, and athletes, and competitive snow sport athletes, the mountains are our training ground. And this is where we enjoy spending our time, where we like to recreate, where we do our sport and are trying to take it to a high level. And really the ultimate goal at the end of each day is to come home safely. So we're gonna start out and I'm gonna show you the trailer of the video. It is a really powerful reenactment. The BRASS Foundation did an amazing job putting this video together. And so if you haven't had a chance yet, we highly recommend that you take a minute sometime later this evening or sometime this week to watch the full-length video.
I see him up there! Hey! Mark Deegan! I see something! One of your friends?
Tragic news tonight as two elite skiers training for a spot on the U.S. Olympic team are killed in an avalanche.
Losing Bryce and Ronnie was a huge hit to the U.S. team, so they could be the guys competing in the Olympics this year.
Ski racing is definitely a dangerous sport. You have all these things that are out there to keep you safe. You get out there in the backcountry, there's none of those luxuries.
People who assume that because they know how to rip down a mountain because they ski downhill, it's a very different beast.
Don't let this happen to you and your family. Get educated, get out there, so we can keep skiing for Bryce and Ronnie, so their legacies live on.
I also want to make sure that we recognize for all of you out there too that Jamie Astle, Bryce Astle's dad, is also on the line with us tonight. So we appreciate both families being here tonight. So kind of getting into the meat of this is, I wanted to start with this statistic. 90% of avalanche accidents are triggered by the victim or someone in the victim's group. And really what this means to me and other avalanche educators is this statistic shows us that we have the opportunity, like Laura Astle pointed out in the video, to really change this, to be able to come home safely tonight. And that's what we're here to start talking about. One of the goals too of this presentation tonight is we're going to give you just a little bit of an overview through a mix of videos and me talking of just avalanche terrain, the 5 know before you go points, and then really highlight some of the differences between inbounds and out of bounds skiing, especially as it applies to the differences between the US and Europe. Oh, so before we get into the video, sorry, we're gonna do our first Mentimeter question. So if you guys have the Mentimeter app, there's the code on this screen. And if you can just plug that in and answer the question. So how do avalanches form?
So what is an avalanche? There's a lot of different kinds of avalanches, but the kind that causes the most trouble are what we call dry slab avalanche. A slab avalanche is like a monster in a horror film. It lies underneath the perfect facade, this enticing powder. And it's just waiting for a trigger to come along, like you, to collapse that weak layer, and then that collapse just goes outwards in all directions. The slope just shadows like a pane of glass. There's no escape. It rockets down the hill, bounces you off trees and rocks on the way down, tumbles you over a cliff. I mean, does any of that sound dangerous to you?
I was not aware, and I did not comprehend the dangers that were out there that day. When I triggered the avalanche, it wrapped me up immediately. Not a second later, I was hit in the back with what felt like a truck. Didn't even have a chance. I ended up laying there in the snow with 2 broken femurs and my broken left arm for between 7 and 8 hours. I've had a total of 4 surgeries, still in therapy 3 days a week, trying to learn how to walk again and get use of my body again.
Avalanches are very violent events. 1 out of 4 people are killed by the trauma of hitting trees and rocks on the way down. And after they tumble you to the bottom, then the avalanche debris instantly sets up like concrete. You can't just pop up out of this. Somebody else has to get you out of the snow.
Really fun day. It was beautiful powder snow, blue skies, sunshine, just pow shots, nothing extreme. We were trying to get gnarly or anything. Came around the corner, dropped in, it was great, and then saw cracks shoot out all around me. I did see like the sky for a moment, and then just a whole wave of snow went over my face. I had like a moment of, maybe I can just punch through to the top, and as soon as I tried to move at all, I realized that I couldn't even bend a finger.
So pretty powerful accounts of some people that have been caught in an avalanche. And I also want to recognize that we had 25 correct responses on the Mentimeter question. So that was, the correct answer there was, yeah, we're looking in the basic sense for strong over weak layering in the snowpack. That's what we are concerned about when we're going out. That's what avalanche forecasters are tracking and looking at. So in this video here, right, we can see that as they're going down, they've got that weak base layer, which is probably some depth hoar, with a strong slab over it. So really in the basic sense, that's our recipe for an avalanche. And as we get storms throughout the winter, not every storm is created equal, not every avalanche is created equal. And so really looking at the terrain that we're going out and skiing and riding each day, that's the piece that we have control over. Here's a few pictures of avalanches that have happened in the Wood River Valley where I live, in the Sun Valley area in the past couple of years. So the big photo on the left, this is an avalanche that came down, I believe it was 2 winters ago, and it was large enough that it actually destroyed this house. Thankfully, no one was at home when this happened. Everyone was fine. So that's obviously a large size avalanche. The picture in the upper right corner of the screen is a cat track in Sun Valley, and enough snow actually came down that it could have buried a smaller human. And then the other photo is one that someone sent to me of actually an elk that got caught in an avalanche during the winter and was up against a tree. And I just thought that was a pretty neat photo. So one of the keys is really just understanding the terrain that avalanches happen on. And I'm sure that you guys have heard this before, right? Is kind of that 38 degrees is prime terrain for that avalanche start zone.
The most important avalanche skill to learn is how to read avalanche terrain, which mainly means judging slope steepness. Almost all avalanches occur on slopes steeper than 30 degrees, but you know what? When the snow is sketchy, we can still have lots of fun playing on mellower terrain. We just want to make sure we're not on, underneath, or even connected to steeper slopes. The bottom line is the only time we should even consider getting into steep terrain is when we have safe avalanche conditions.
Some slopes are going to produce much worse outcomes should they avalanche than other slopes. For example, if you're above a bunch of trees, rocks, cliffs, or you're going to get washed into a lake or a gully, the outcome of getting caught in an avalanche like that is much worse than if you're in some big wide open meadow.
So like they talked about in the video, is terrain is really important to us because one, we want to know what type of terrain avalanches commonly happen on, and we also want to recognize the consequences of the terrain that we're in if we were to get caught. The other piece that's, as you go on in your avalanche education, that you're going to hear a lot from avalanche instructors, from guides, is terrain is the one piece that we have control over. We can choose what terrain that we go on. So we know that most avalanches happen between 30 and 45 degrees. Below 30 degrees, it's usually not steep enough to slide. We see very few avalanches on that. The caveat there is unless it's connected to a steeper terrain. And then terrain that's steeper than 45 degrees, we tend to not see that many big avalanches on because usually that snow is just constantly sloughing off. So it doesn't really have the opportunity to build slabs. So it's not really sticking to that steeper terrain. So we're going to go to our next Mentimeter question, and it's the same code as before. So we're, again, just trying to recognize different start zones for avalanches. So this is where we would see that primary spot that an avalanche could start sliding, but it could still affect the adjacent terrain. So when we're thinking about going out and traveling in avalanche terrain, recognizing what is avalanche terrain, having a plan for it, and thinking about, you know, where are safe places that we can be traveling on our ascent and also our descent and regrouping. And we're going to get into that more when we get into the get the points. And then, like they talked about in the video too, there are certain places that are commonly called terrain traps that we're out looking for too. Any place that's going to increase the consequences of getting caught in an avalanche. So when we look at that photo of this gully or a sharp transition in this slide, even if we were to be caught in a small avalanche, it's going to take a lot less snow to bury you. And then same on the other slides, just the consequences of being even in a small avalanche or a small slough are more consequential because of the terrain surrounding it. So that's part of what we want to be looking at when we're operating in and around avalanche terrain. So that was just a little fun video that the Freeride World Tour put out. And to go back to that last Mentimeter question, the correct answer that we were looking for is the far right side of that picture is where we want to be traveling. So in that Freeride World Tour video, they talked about, again, just some of the skills you need. And one thing I want to highlight in that video, and especially for this audience, is when we talk about having the skills to go out, is all of us on this call are great expert skiers, and just recognizing and keeping in mind as we go throughout the rest of this presentation that it's often assumed that because we're such strong skiers and riders that our avalanche knowledge also matches that ability. And so just also recognizing as you're making plans, as you're making decisions to go out the ski area boundaries or to go and ride in the backcountry, is differentiating those skills and saying to yourself and asking to yourself and to your group, what are our riding skills as a group, but also what's our collective avalanche knowledge of the group, and how do we choose that terrain for the day? And so in this next part, we're just going to highlight some of the differences between inbound skiing and out of bound skiing and how those apply to the US. An important statistic that I'm going to hit on a couple times that I think is just super important and kind of not talked about enough is that last year in the US, prior to the COVID shutdown, there was 4 avalanche fatalities inbounds. So there are still certain days, even if you are only an inbounds rider, that you might need to tap into that backcountry brain.
The difference between riding in a ski resort and riding in the backcountry is really night and day. In a ski resort, we use explosives and terrain closure to minimize the risk of avalanches to our customers. But outside the ski area, once you step just 2 feet over that rope line, you're in a totally different environment.
Anybody that's going into the backcountry or thinking about going off-piste at a resort really needs to understand that it's a totally uncontrolled environment. There isn't any ski patrol, they're not bombing or doing any avalanche control. It can be really dangerous. So essentially you need to be, your own avalanche expert.
So in 9 out of 10 avalanche fatalities, they're triggered by the victim or somebody in the victim's party, which is actually good because it's not like getting struck by lightning. We have a choice. That means if we learn something about avalanches, we can avoid getting caught in avalanches.
So like they talked about in the video, for the US, ski patrol does control and mitigation work for avalanches within the ski area boundaries. Once you stepped out of those boundaries, they're no longer doing control work. A lot of times there are signs posted, there's places to check beacons. Sometimes they even post the avalanche forecast. And also, again, showing the statistics is last year alone, there was 4 fatalities that did occur in resorts last year. So just thinking too, there's certain days where we do need to kind of switch our mentality a little bit inbounds and be a little bit more aware that ski patrol has done their best on that day, but that we also need to be paying attention. And for sure, when we're going out of the ski area gates, is recognizing that side country skiing, which people often refer to it, that is the same as backcountry, as there's no control work. We want to be having the gear with us. We want to be having a good plan, and we want to have the ability to self-rescue. Another thing that was particularly interesting to myself and a lot of other avalanche educators this spring, especially in Utah, I noticed this trend is once the ski area is closed down this past spring, which was roughly around March 15th, is there were a couple avalanches that occurred within ski area boundaries that people had some close calls with. And that was just obviously because ski patrol stopped controlling that area. And so I think that's also something important to remember for early season and late season, that even if we're going touring within a ski area boundary, if it's not open, then they're also not controlling it. As this relates to Europe, this is a little bit different and it changes there. So on-piste in Europe refers to groomed slopes. Off-piste is ungroomed, and they don't do avalanche mitigation there. And a great resource for Europe to find out, what's going on, getting the local forecast, is talking to local ski patrollers. So we've got our next Mentimeter question up here. And now we're going to get into these 5 know before you go points. Get the gear, get the training, get the forecast, get the picture, and get out of harm's way. And to go back to that Mentimeter question, the correct answer was outside the ski run, no avalanche mitigation. So nice work. Thanks for responding, you guys. This is awesome participation on these Mentimeters. So one of the first get the points is get the gear, is having that avalanche rescue gear. And these 3 pieces of equipment, I think of these as the bare minimum, right? That avalanche transceiver, probe, shovel. Along with this, I'm making a plan, and the most important piece of gear that we can always carry with us is just our awareness, is being aware to the surroundings. So a couple notes on an avalanche transceiver is we want to make sure that we're working with a modern 3 antenna beacon and that we're wearing it properly. Kind of the best way to wear a transceiver is in the harness that it comes with, and then also being very aware of its proximity to other electronics. They will interfere with the signal. And then also making sure that we're going by the manufacturer's recommendations on battery percentage. A transceiver uses more battery power when it's in search mode than in transmit mode. A probe, and we want to make sure that we have a probe that's long enough. So the average burial depth of an avalanche is 1.5 meters. So we want a probe that at minimum is 180 to 200 centimeters is an appropriate size probe. And then a shovel. If you think about avalanche debris, it's really firm. It's very similar to when a plow comes and plows your driveway, and then you get that pile of snow that's been pushed by the plow. So we want to make sure that we have a plastic shovel. And if we're carrying good gear, it's really our partners at the end of the day that are going to come to our rescue. So we want to make sure that we're checking our partners' gear and making sure that it's good and appropriate gear as well.
Avalanche safety can seem totally overwhelming, but there is a systematic step-by-step process that can keep you alive in avalanche terrain. Just knowing 5 basic things can prevent most avalanche accidents. Get the gear, get the training, get the forecast, get the picture, and get out of harm's way.
Everyone who goes into backcountry avalanche terrain needs basic avalanche rescue gear.
You need an avalanche transceiver, a shovel, and a probe. And you need to practice a lot to know how to use all of this gear, because your friend only has about 15 minutes to live buried beneath the snow.
A lot of people also use an inflatable avalanche airbag backpack that will help them rise to the top of avalanche debris. How well does this avalanche rescue gear actually work? Well, for 1 out of 4 people killed in an avalanche, they're gonna die from trauma. They're gonna hit trees or rocks on the way down the slope. So avalanche rescue gear isn't gonna do anything for them. The rest of them die from asphyxia, from breathing their own carbon dioxide underneath the snow. But it doesn't have to be that way.
If everyone wore an avalanche airbag backpack, as well as an avalanche transceiver, 2 out of 3 people who die from asphyxia would still be alive.
The bottom line is avalanche rescue gear will only save about half of us. But in order to stack the odds in my favor, I make sure to never go skiing without them.
As sledders, we travel in the backcountry a little bit differently than skiers, but I still need to have my avalanche gear attached to my body. Having it attached to my tunnel does me no good. If I get separated from my sled, I get separated from my safety gear. If your buddies that you ride with don't have the training and the equipment, don't let them ride with you.
So I did see a clarification in the text box, and I just want to make sure that I spoke correctly to it. Is yes, I believe I said metal shovel. If I did not, I apologize, and thanks for clarifying. But yes, we absolutely want a metal shovel. And a great way to test it is, like I said, to go out and shovel as hard as you can for a minute in a snowbank. And if your shovel withstands that, then it's probably a good shovel and it's metal. I've seen a lot of students break shovels just doing that exercise in avalanche classes. So that's a really good test to it. And with all this stuff too, just making sure that we're practicing. I've read a lot of studies and I've seen statistics of difference in rescue times between recreational users and professionals. And as you would expect, professionals are faster at beacon burials and digging up and practice scenarios. And really the only reason is because they are forced to practice more for their profession. So really getting out and practicing with the gear and practicing with your partners. And they mentioned two airbag packs as a tool in the last videos that we watched. That is also something that you want to practice using, practice inflating, know where your trigger is. I've talked to a lot of people that have, or a handful of people that have unfortunately had to pull their airbag packs when they've been caught in an avalanche. And one of the biggest things I've heard from them is that they went to reach for the trigger and it took them multiple tries to get it. So if we are carrying that piece of equipment, that's also something we want to test to make sure it works, and also something that we're practiced on knowing where that is and having that handy. It seems like in the anecdotal tales that I've heard from people is that it's taken them a couple times to trigger it. And then getting that training is that get the piece.
So now that you've got the gear, you've got to get the training. So when you take an avalanche course, you're basically getting keys to a whole new world. You'll learn about avalanche terrain, snowpack, weather, rescue. Essentially, you're trying to take the guesswork out of travel in avalanche terrain.
As a first timer just coming in, it's really important to take the right classes and gain all the knowledge before going out in the backcountry.
Getting the training isn't just taking an avalanche class. It's a great start, but really it's about practicing what you've learned. Make it a ritual. Make it fun. Throw down some lunch money and do some time drills. When it comes down to it, it's about having your friends back and knowing that they have yours.
It's not just the skiers that need to get the training, because sleds are taking us further into the backcountry. So we really need to bring our avalanche skills up to the level of our rider skills.
Next, you gotta get the forecast. These avalanche forecasters are pros. They're gonna tell you everything you need to know. They're gonna tell you about the snowpack. They're gonna tell you about the weak layers. They're gonna tell you where avalanches are gonna happen, where you can likely avoid avalanches. All that information is one click away.
To get the avalanche forecast, visit avalanche.ca in Canada or avalanche.org in the States.
Before I even get on the snow, I check my local avalanche advisory.
So take the time, get the forecast.
So here's a few resources for where you can find information on avalanche training. Another really good resource is when you go to avalanche.org, or if you're already familiar with your local avalanche forecasting center, they also tend to have a lot of tools and resources for avalanche education. And there's so many good talks too and other avalanche awareness events that different avalanche forecasting centers put on. Especially, I know that we're in Intermountain, the Utah Avalanche Center has some great resources. Now is the season where there's a lot of snow avalanche workshops going on, and they're all online this year. So using these tools and also getting familiar with your local avalanche forecasting centers to help you find resources on getting the training. So the first couple get the points of get the gear, get the training. That's a lot of stuff that we're doing pre-season. We're practicing those skills throughout the season. And now the last three get the points. We're going to talk about And these points highlight the things that we do as well every day that we go out. Getting the forecast, getting the picture, getting out of harm's way. So in terms of the forecast, like Lel said in that last video, is you can go on to avalanche.ca in Canada, avalanche.org in the US, or if you know your local forecasting center. And one of the first things you're gonna see is you're gonna see a danger rating for the day. An important thing to remember about the North American avalanche danger scale is that it increases exponentially. And I really encourage you also practice reading the avalanche forecast, get comfortable with this dialogue and the way that they talk about it. And also look beyond the colors. They give you travel advice. They give you the likelihood of that avalanche happening and the triggers. And then they're also going to give you a size. And so really understanding the colors and the text that goes along with the colors. Most avalanche accidents that we see occur in moderate and considerable danger. And like we said earlier, not every avalanche is created equal. Not every avalanche problem is created equal. And so really digging a little bit deeper in the forecast, and they're going to tell you in that forecast, what is the avalanche problem today? Where have they seen that problem? And there's different graphics as well to illustrate this. And then how might the weather affect your plan for that day? So taking all of these pieces from the avalanche forecast and starting to generate a plan with that information before you go out. Most avalanche forecasts too are going to give you specific travel advice. So they might say in an avalanche forecast, avoid slopes that are northwest facing that are steeper than 35 degrees. So it's very common that they give you travel advice. And then they also have different graphics to represent where the problem is. Here's just some examples of some other ways to illustrate a forecast or that you might see in the forecast. And one really cool tool that this slide shows is you see the little blue info button. So if this were a live screen that I was going to on a page, I could scroll over that info button and it's going to tell me a little bit more and a definition of what is a wind slab. What are they doing here? And so that's also a really great tool to use in the forecast.
When you're traveling in the backcountry, you got to get the picture. What's that mean? It means pay attention. Look for recent avalanches. Listen for cracking or wumping that's taking place around you. Look for recent storm snow, wind-loaded snow. Look for rapid thawing. If you look for all these things, you're going to get the picture. You're going to be a safer backcountry skier.
So we're using that forecast to help develop a plan today for that day that we're going out, to select the terrain that we want to travel in. And then when we go out, we're continuing to observe and to observe around us. So just because we see ski tracks on a slope, it doesn't necessarily mean that's safe to ski. And as just being avalanche aware and mountain aware, is we want to question things. We want to ask ourselves, these people that skied this slope, did they get lucky today? Or did they make some good decisions and did they know something? And then there's some clues that we really want to be looking for when we're out that are kind of like screaming in our face, we like to say. So the first one is, if you're going out, recent avalanche on similar slopes that you might be thinking about skiing or riding for that day. So the biggest indicator that avalanches are happening is if we see avalanches. And so thinking about that, thinking about how that affects our plan. Any wind drifted snow. So the wind has a great ability to transport snow rapidly. So in this slide here on this roof, the snow is blowing from the downhill side of the roof to the uphill side where there's more, where the snow has been deposited on the uphill side of that roof. That's probably where we want to ski. But being a little bit weary of, okay, what was the avalanche problem? Thinking back to our forecast. And then also as we're out there, you know, is the wind increasing throughout the day? So here's our next Mentimeter question. So another obvious sign that we're looking for if we're out that's kind of screaming in our face is if we hear cracking or collapsing or whoomping. That is a sign of obvious instability in the snow. So I'll let you guys take a minute with your Mentimeter. And another red flag or kind of obvious clue when we're going out is rain or new snow. Rain we're concerned about because we're adding moisture, we're adding weight to the snowpack. And new snow, anytime we have a lot of new snow coming down quickly. So the snowpack really doesn't respond well to rapid change. So if things are changing very quickly when we're out for a day, that should be a sign for us that, hey, let's like check out our plan. Let's think about what we're doing. What is this red flag that we're seeing? How have things changed? Same with the rapid thaw. In the spring, you often see these roller balls as things are starting to warm up. And that's another sign that another big clue that we're looking for of just kind of screaming in our face of something's changing quickly. It looks like you guys did awesome on the last Mentimeter question. We've got a really high number of correct answers. Nice job, you guys. This is getting into the next point, which is getting out of harm's way. So I guess one thing that I want to add to before we move on to getting out of harm's way, but in get the picture is another thing too when we're looking at this big picture is we want to obviously be aware of things changing throughout the day and just any of those obvious clues that we just went through, but also of other user groups is who are the people around us and how might the choices they're making affect us. So just being aware of other groups and, you know, communicating to them politely too, if you need to, what's your plan? Where are you guys headed? But I think that's also part of getting the picture. As far as getting out of harm's way, so this is a photo of an avalanche that happened on April 20th, 2013, with a group of experienced backcountry users. They were traveling at the bottom of an avalanche path. They thought that they were practicing safe travel techniques. Unknown to them, their avalanche problem for the day was a deep, persistent slab problem, which there's a lot of uncertainty around that specific avalanche problem. And they triggered a slide, and unfortunately it was a very big slide, and there was 6 people caught and 5 people killed, unfortunately. So the big picture on the left is the debris pile. The smaller photo is the location of where one of the people was buried, and they were buried 15 feet under the ground. And so in this next section, we're gonna watch a video on the next get the point, getting out of harm's way.
You get out of harm's way in the backcountry by first avoiding suspect slopes and terrain to begin with. We don't want to regroup in avalanche paths, and we don't want to stop or regroup in runout zones.
Some of my best advice I can give you is when we're out hill climbing and there's a bunch of us, don't go park right at the bottom in the avalanche path. Park on the outside, stay out of harm's way.
Just like you ski a slope, one person at a time. Once you're at the bottom, get out of the way of the avalanche path.
So one technique that we have to get out of harm's way is skiing or riding or traveling across certain slopes one at a time. And for getting out of harm's way, like that accident we just talked about too, is getting out of harm's way applies to both the ascent, so both our uphill travel and our downhill travel techniques. So going one at a time, and if you're the person that's riding the slope, then the other person is also having eyes on that person, so you know where they are, you can see what's going on with them. Is like skiing and riding one at a time is one way that we can mitigate that. Also, just having a really strong communication plan and talking about that with your partners. Where are we going to regroup? thinking back to that forecast, what is the avalanche problem for the day that was pointed out? When I see deep persistent slab or persistent slab in the avalanche forecast, that gets my hairs up a little bit more than some of the other avalanche problems. And that's something I'm physically going to give more room from. And that's a strategy that we have as well, right? Going back to that piece of terrain is if we're not sure, if we have uncertainty around something, is physically giving it more distance of the areas that we're not sure about are also important to help mitigate it. And then really thinking about where you're stopping, where you're regrouping, trying to stay out of an avalanche path. So we've got our next Mentimeter question, and there's actually two in this question. So the first one's going to apply to this slide on the left, I believe. So we've got this person here. And then the second question will apply to the slide on the right. So the 5 get the points is get the training, get the gear, right? And those are things that we can thinking about now. You guys are already doing one step of that by being on this presentation tonight, which is awesome. And then the next 3 points that we went through, get the picture, get out of harm's way, get the forecast. Those are things that we're doing each day that we go out, starting with that, get the forecast, making a plan with our group, deciding where we're going to go, and then continuing to observe and communicate with our team as we're going out. One of the things that I enjoy most about traveling in the backcountry is that aspect of teamwork. Is we rely on our partners for safety in the backcountry. We rely on our partners for making those observations and talking about those different plans, and that teamwork aspect is just super rewarding to me. So before I get into human factors, I just want to go back to the last Mentimeter slide. And it sounds like everyone, the info that I'm getting is that nearly everyone answered correctly. So nice job, you guys. Tom, did you want to chime in on anything with this Mentimeter question? Okay, I think what he is saying to me is now you guys can do the Mentimeter question for the photo on the right. Sorry if I skipped past that. I was just so excited to talk about human factors. Cool, so it sounds like you guys did super well on that question too. The correct answer for the second Mentimeter question in this one is that the group is waiting in the slide path. So nice work, you guys. Human factors. So like I was saying before, is teamwork is super important in the backcountry. And just recognizing too that everyone has different risk acceptance surrounding what they're willing to ski. People have different skiing and riding ability. People have different avalanche expertise and knowledge, and they're at different places with their training. And so some of the ways that we can mitigate dealing with these human factors is one, knowing that they exist, knowing that when we go out backcountry skiing and we see beautiful snow on the ground, that powder snow, it's blue skies, that we want to go ski that. And so referring back to, what did the forecast say? Having a plan. I always write down in a notebook, what was the avalanche forecast for the day? What are the terrain parameters that we gave ourselves before going out? And then I refer to that when I'm in the backcountry. And having that plan is one way that we can help mitigate these human factors. As humans too, we're also subject to social pressures. So we want that untracked snow. We want to fit in with the group. And so just being aware that those are factors that we're dealing with in the backcountry too, and not being afraid to communicate. If you don't like something that the group's doing, if you don't like where you guys are regrouping, is a part of being a really good backcountry partner is having that ability to communicate and feel comfortable in your group communicating. And hopefully as you go on with your avalanche education, this is something that Avalanche 1 courses and human factors stays a theme throughout all avalanche courses, is strategies and systematic ways to approach this so that we can mitigate some of these human factors that we're dealing with as well. So hopefully some of the takeaways that you guys got out of tonight is backcountry skiing is all about teamwork. It can be super fun. It's awesome to be out there with a good teammate. It's super important to think about those 5 get the points that we went over is get the gear, get the training, get the forecast, get the picture, get out of harm's way. And then using our resources and our tools that we have out there. Avalanche.org, we've highlighted several times during this presentation, using your local avalanche forecasts as competitive snow sport athletes as well. These avalanche forecasts, they also are a great tool for getting really good weather information, of making a wax call, of being able to, you know, go to a competition in the Pacific Northwest and have an idea of what the weather has been doing, what the snow surface might be like leading up to that race or that big mountain comp, whatever it is, that those are also great tools that we can get from the forecast. And then remembering too that we still want to be reading the forecast when we're skiing inbounds, especially if we've just had a big snow, especially if we're traveling someplace new, and recognizing that in the US, when we are inbounds, that's where Ski Patrol is doing control work. When we are in Europe, that changes. And where they do control work is much different. And the way that their terminology is different is when we go over to Europe, is on-piste refers to groom slopes and off-piste refers to anything that's off those groom slopes. And really talking to Ski Patrol when you're over there, reading the local avalanche forecast over there and finding out what's going on with the snow, where are places that are controlled and where aren't they. And that's where, again, Ski Patrol can be a great resource when you're traveling to different places. So thank you guys so much for paying attention. I believe we have one more video.
We want you to realize that avalanches are dangerous, but you can avoid getting caught in them. First, get the gear. But then you've got to get the training before ever going into the backcountry. Next, always check your local avalanche forecast so you can anticipate the given avalanche conditions for the day. You can get the picture by looking for the obvious signs of instability, and you'll be getting out of harm's way by managing your exposure to potentially hazardous slopes.
A lot of times when people watch us in the films, all they see is the action of us shredding these big lines. But what you don't see is the behind the scene, all the prep that goes into making sure that the slopes are safe, checking out the snowpack, waiting for snow to settle, doing all the homework it takes to safely rip the big lines.
All this information is great and incredibly practical. But at the end of the day, if you feel uneasy about something, it's about having the courage to say no and walk away. The mountain isn't going anywhere.
It doesn't matter if you've made thousands of good calls. All it takes is one bad call, and that's one too many. Some days the mountains are screaming, get out of here, and some days the mountains are going, come on in, it's time to party.
So I really want to thank everyone for coming on tonight, and we have left a fair bit of time at the end on purpose for you guys to have the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So if you want to use either the chat box or the Q&A, and I'd love to answer questions. Maybe there's something that we didn't touch upon in the presentation that you're wanting to know. And so, yeah, please use those chat boxes. There's got to be something out there. So we do have a question that I might hand over to Tom for some of these. If you want to unmute Tom, is just asking about other training material from BRASS and some resources. And then, yeah, we seem to have a lot of questions about avalanche training.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for doing this tonight, Lindsay. It's great to have you on board. BRASS 101 is the primary tool that we put together. It's designed principally for clubs, schools, and academies. But as you can see from tonight, it's just a great refresher course. One of the places I would direct you, which is an amazing resource, is the Know Before You Go website, kbyg.org. There's a wealth of materials there. And if you have friends who are just looking to get a basic introduction, that's a really good place to send them. The other tool that we like to recommend at BRASS is to show the full length, the 13-minute version of Off-Piste. It's just a remarkably emotional, poignant, but educational video that shows you the reality of what can happen, but also gives you the points that you need to start your journey in avalanche education. Lindsay, we do have another question in the Q&A, but before we go there, Lindsay, maybe you could talk a little bit about, with this introductory knowledge, where do people go to get on snow training, which is really what you ought to strive for?
Yeah, and I see some of those questions in the chat box. So I do know that most local guide services are still planning to do in-person courses. They might, instead of doing the classroom portions in person, they might be doing them via Zoom or have some creative ways. But as far as the outdoor component, I know that at least the guide services that I work for here locally, and I've talked to some friends and guides in Utah and Pacific Northwest, and I know that they're also planning to do in-person classes as well. Another really good resource too is, I know that here locally in the Wood River Valley, the Friends of the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, they will do some in-person trainings and reviews of beacon work, of companion rescue, and that can also be a great stepping stone to feel confident to take a level 1 course. And so again, really going and looking at resources that your local avalanche center has. And a lot of local forecasting centers too, they'll have a newsletter, and in that newsletter that they send out, or in that communication, they will also highlight avalanche trainings in their communications there of like what's going on locally. So there's a lot of ways to get kind of more stepping stones if you're not ready to take a level 1 course, or if you don't have the time to do so this winter.
Hey, Lindsay, one question a little bit more granular from what we're talking about that's in the Q&A. Can you give any direction on avalanche safety courses in North Tahoe? I know that there's a very good regional program there. Do you know anything about that one you could pass on?
Yeah, North Tahoe. So I know that Alpenglow Expeditions, I know that's one guide service that works out of there. And I think really, again, going to the forecasting center, and then also to going on to the ARI website. And they have a place that you can just click and you can see all like the level 1 or level 2 avalanche courses across the whole US. And then you can look per your region. And I do actually. Sorry, there's a lot of technology going on. But I also here, I have my email address up. So if anyone does have like pretty specific questions or is looking for an avalanche course in their area, please feel free to send me an email. And there's also the BRASS Avalanche or BRASS website that's up here as well. So 2 resources if I don't specifically answer that. So another question that I see in the chat box is related to airbag packs. So I'm glad you asked this because I think this is a really good question. So the question is, do you have any stats on survival rates for airbag packs versus no airbag packs? So if you remember back to one of the videos that we watched earlier, roughly, I believe about 1/3 of people that are caught in avalanches die of trauma. So they're, it could be they're getting run over trees or whatever that is. So trauma is one thing. And avalanche packs, depending on the terrain that you're in, they have different uses. So if you're in an area and you pull an avalanche pack and there's a ton of trees or anything that could puncture that airbag, then it has the potential to become less effective. Where they do a really great job, and the whole theory behind airbag packs is that like Brazil nut theory, right? Is that if you like shake those mixed nuts or if you shake a bag of chips, the biggest chip or the Brazil nuts are going to be on top. And that's the same idea with the avalanche airbag, is that it's making you bigger, it's making your surface area bigger so that hopefully you stay on top of that avalanche. As far as specific statistics, I actually listened to a podcast the other day on it. And off the top of my head, I believe it's like you have a 40% better survival chance. And I might be misquoting that, of if you have an airbag. And there's pros and cons to airbags. And one thing about them that's been talked about a lot is, does having an airbag give you false confidence? And that has been something that's been widely talked about in the industry as they've come out. And so just remembering too that if you are skiing with an airbag pack, I ski with with one sometimes. I don't ski with it all the time. But I always like to remind myself to make the same decisions that I would, whether or not I was wearing my avalanche pack. But it is a great piece of safety gear.
Lindsay, just one other point, I'll chime in, a comment from Jamie Astle. Thanks, Jamie. He points out that this year is going to be extremely busy in the backcountry. And we certainly saw that this spring when COVID hit. And even before COVID, the sales of backcountry gear over the last 3 years is up well over 130%. And that's before COVID. So do anticipate larger crowds in the backcountry. And one of the things that means is you need to look out for other people and look at the avalanche train above you. Lindsay, any thoughts on that in terms of our travel in the backcountry this year when it is busier? What other hazards do we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Jamie makes is we definitely saw an increase of backcountry users once the ski area shut down. And so, part of, I think, getting the picture that's important for this year, but important for any year too, is just paying attention to the different groups around you. Is who's out there, what's their plan? When I see a group out in the backcountry, if we're kind of close together, I'll just stop by and say, hey, and what are you guys planning to ski today? What's your plan? And just like we judge people within the ski area based on what they're wearing, how they're carrying themselves, I do that in the backcountry also, whether that's good or bad. But I'm kind of, it's like, is this a pretty dialed group? Cool, they seem to have a good plan. Or, oh, maybe this is a group I want to be a little bit weary of when they're out there. Or maybe, if I'm worried about their habits, I might say, hey, we're going to ski this. If you guys want to, come in behind us, we feel pretty good about this plan. But yeah, just being aware of other user groups out there. And that is also has the potential to be a hazard in the backcountry, as well as the side country just out of ski area boundaries is, is there a group above me? Where am I in relationship to them? And just really thinking about that as you're out there. And there's a really good, I listened to this really good podcast the other day, is Snow Brains. That website started putting out a podcast, and they did a really good interview with Dr. Ethan Green from the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. And he actually talked about that question specifically too, and just the increase in users in Colorado last spring when the ski area shut down.
Okay, we're open for any other questions for Lindsay. We've got a few minutes left. If anyone would like to put that in the chat or the Q&A, now's your chance. While we're waiting for that next question, we will be doing several more of these. The next one up is on November 4th, and we'll send an advisory out to everyone who participated in case you have any friends you'd like to turn on to this free opportunity. Any last questions for Lindsay before we close it out for the evening? Lindsay, do you have any final thoughts before we close down for the night?
I just want to say I hope everyone has a good, safe winter. Thank you guys so much for listening tonight. It's a little awkward presenting when I'm just looking at a computer screen. So if you did attend this too, and we meet on the slopes this winter or in an avalanche course or anything, please come up, introduce yourself. And then definitely a big thank you to the Burlak family, the Astle family, the BRASS Foundation, and Tom for helping me with all the tech tonight. So thank you guys. Have a great winter, and hopefully we get some really good snow.
Lindsay, thanks a lot. And everybody give Lindsay a virtual round of applause here. And thanks for doing this tonight. And again, we'll be doing another one on November 4th. We also have one scheduled with Lindsay again on November 12th. We'll send an advisory out to everyone. Have a great season coming up and a safe one. Thanks for joining us tonight.